All right, everyone, excited to dive in today. Let's talk about economic disparity. Something tells me you've been thinking about this one already.
You've been digging deep into your SS32001 notes, it seems,
Hmm.
particularly Unit 3 on political economy. Looks like you're trying to wrap your head around how all this connects to quality of life, huh?
Exactly. We're talking about how different economics structures, those sectors really impact how countries develop. It's a lot to process.
It really is. You've got your notes on primary industries like farming, fishing, mining,
Yeah.
those foundational sectors that extract raw materials.
Right. The basics. But then it gets more complex. We go from extracting to processing, right? Turning trees into lumber or into steel. That's the secondary sector in action.
And then we get to the real game changer, the tertiary sector, the service industry. That's often where you see the bulk of the wealth concentrated in developed nations.
Which makes you wonder about those countries trying to, I don't know, play catch up in today's world. Is that even possible anymore, do you think, to follow that traditional path?
That's the question, isn't it? And you even have a note here about countries kind of uh, leapfrogging over entire stages, especially in our globalized world. But even with incredible growth, there's always the other side of the coin.
You mean economic disparity? Those figures you've got in your notes about the top 1% controlling so much of the wealth? It's pretty jarring to see in black and white.
And you've even highlighted the Gini index, which puts a number on inequality. That's always a thought-provoking figure. It makes you look at the world a little differently.
It really does. I was surprised by some of those rankings. Really shows how economic policies have a real impact. But where does it all come from, this imbalance? I mean, you've got colonialism, you've got lack of investment, even infectious diseases playing a role. It's a bit overwhelming.
It is. And those factors don't exist in a vacuum. It's not about finding one single cause. Think of a country trying to recover from colonial rule, right?
Hmm.
Attracting investment is a huge hurdle, which impacts their healthcare system. And that then affects the workforce. It's a vicious cycle.
Like dominoes, one thing impacting another. But you're not just focused on the problems, you've been exploring solutions too. You've got everything from progressivism to neoliberalism in those notes. Talk about a range of ideas.
Well, it's all about the role of government, isn't it? How much should they intervene in the economy? And there's no easy answer, like with protectionism, for example. On one hand, it shields local industries, but it can also stifle innovation and mean higher prices for everyone.
It's tough trying to find that balance, protect local interests, but also encourage global competition. And speaking of real world examples, you've even got some current events in your notes.
Well, the debate around Canada and COVAX, that global vaccine initiative, really brings it all home, doesn't it?
It makes you really think about Canada's role in all of this, especially when you consider the economic disparity we see within our own borders. And you've got some notes on that too.
It's true, you've highlighted how even the United States, the wealthiest nation globally, struggles with income inequality.
Hmm.
And then there's that statistic. Less than 1% controlling almost half the world's wealth.
Hmm.
It's hard to ignore.
It makes those global figures hit even closer to home.
Yeah.
You've also got a point here about how Asian nations combined actually hold more wealth than the US. That's interesting.
It is. The global landscape is shifting, that's for sure. But you've also contrasted that with the small percentage controlled by underdeveloped countries, especially in Africa and Latin America.
It's almost unbelievable. Africa with just 1.14% and Latin America 2.75%. What factors lead to such a huge difference?
And how do those regions break free from those constraints? Big questions, definitely.
It's like we're always trying to find that sweet spot, aren't we? Lifting people up from poverty, but also making sure the wealth isn't all concentrated at the top. And you've actually got notes on how different economic systems have tackled this throughout history.
It's true. You've been looking at how traditional economies often prioritize community and sustainability, while in command economies, the government controls pretty much everything. Production, distribution, the whole shebang.
And then there's the system we're most familiar with, the free market, individualism, competition. But even here in Canada, you've pointed out that we still see a role for government. Someone's got to keep things fair, right?
It's that mixed economy model you've been studying, finding that balance,
Yeah.
letting the market do its thing, but having the government step in when needed. It's about making sure everyone has a real shot at a good life.
Like baking a cake, right? Too much of one ingredient and it's a disaster.
Huh, perfect analogy. And just like baking, there's no one right way to build a society that's both thriving and fair. It takes trial and error, adapting to what works.
And that's where things get really interesting, don't they? You've got progressivism, neoliberalism, all these different ideas about how involved the government should be. It's a debate that never gets old.
And it shouldn't. These are the conversations that shape the world we live in. But it's more than just picking a side, isn't it? It's about understand the nuances of each argument.
Exactly. The trade-offs, the complexities.
Hmm.
It's not always black and white.
And that's what makes this deep dive so engaging. We're not afraid of the gray areas because that's where the real learning happens.
It's about giving you, the listener, the tools to think critically about all of this. And speaking of tools, you've got some fascinating examples in your notes of how different countries are tackling this. Even universal basic income is in there. The idea of everyone getting a minimum income no matter what. That's a big one.
It is a big one.
Okay.
And you've highlighted both sides of the argument. On one hand, it could really help reduce poverty, but then there are those questions about cost and whether it discourages people from working. Tough stuff.
Always a balancing act. But I like that these big, bold ideas are being considered. Of course, you've also got more familiar approaches in there, like raising the minimum wage, tackling housing costs, investing in early childhood education, all essential pieces of the puzzle.
They are, for sure. But as you pointed out, it goes beyond just policies and programs. We need to talk about the systemic barriers that hold people back,
Yeah.
things that are harder to see, harder to fix.
You're talking about discrimination, right?
Mm,
Based on race, gender, religion, all of it. It's like starting a race miles behind everyone else.
exactly. We can't ignore those systemic issues. It's about changing how we think, how we act, how we build systems that are fair for everyone.
A world where your background doesn't determine your destiny, where you have a chance to succeed based on your own merit.
A powerful idea. And speaking of big ideas, what about the role of global organizations in all of this? You've got the Millennium Development Goals in your notes, a pretty ambitious plan by the UN.
Right, back in 2000. And you're right, they didn't achieve everything, but it got people talking about these global issues, right? Poverty, hunger, lack of education, it's all connected.
And that paved the way for the Sustainable Development Goals,
Yeah.
SDGs. Those are even more comprehensive. You're not just addressing the symptoms anymore. You're looking at the root causes of inequality.
And I love how you've highlighted the role of NGOs in all of this, doing the groundwork, advocating for change, filling in those gaps where governments fall short. So important.
Absolutely. It's like a three-pronged approach, you know. Government setting the stage, businesses playing their part, and NGOs working directly with communities. It takes a village, right?
Huh, I like that. A global village working together. But it's not just about the big picture, is it? You even mentioned this Dollar Street project. Have you seen that one? Shows you what life is like for people around the world, all based on income.
It's a powerful tool for building empathy, that's for sure. You see those statistics come to life. It's not just numbers anymore, it's real people.
It's on my to-do list now. Speaking of real people and real stories, I think it's time we dug into some of the root causes of disparity. You've got a whole section on colonialism and its lasting impact.
Yeah, you can't talk about this topic without addressing that legacy. The way resources were exploited, traditional economies disrupted, it still affects us today.
Like a ripple effect through generations. And then there's neocolonialism, which you've described as a more subtle form of control. It's eye-opening how these historical forces continue to shape the world.
It's a good reminder that we're not just dealing with theories here. We're talking about real consequences, real lives.
And those consequences can be pretty devastating. You've got some pretty alarming stats on how infectious diseases, things like malaria and HIV/AIDS, can completely derail economic development, especially in developing countries.
It's a brutal cycle. Disease leads to poverty, which leads to more disease, and then throw a global pandemic like COVID-19 into the mix, and
Talk about turning the world upside down. It really showed how interconnected we all are, how these global crises can make existing inequalities even worse.
no doubt about it, it exposed the weaknesses in our systems and really forced us to think about more equitable solutions.
And it sparked some really tough conversations about global responsibility. Kind of like that debate we were talking about earlier with Canada and COVAX.
Exactly. Should Canada accept vaccines from a program that's supposed to help ensure global access? It's a perfect example of those ethical dilemmas we face.
It's like walking a tightrope, right? Trying to take care of your own citizens, but also do what's right for the world. Not always easy.
Not at all. But these are the conversations we need to have if we're serious about creating a better world, a fairer world.
You know, going through all of this, it really hits home that economic disparity isn't inevitable, you know? It's a result of choices, the systems we build, the policies we make. It's on us.
It's about recognizing we're not just along for the ride. We can steer this ship in a better direction, towards a future where things are more balanced, more fair.
That's actually pretty powerful when you think about it.
Mm.
But where do we even begin? We've talked about the global picture, the different economic systems, those deep-rooted causes of inequality. It's a lot.
You've hit on some key points in your notes, though. We need governments that aren't afraid to implement policies promoting fairness. Fair wages, access to housing, healthcare, education. Those are essential,
Hmm.
but it can't stop there.
Right, everyone's got skin in the game. We need businesses to step up. How are they treating their workers? Are they investing in their communities? And then there's us, the everyday choices we make as consumers, as voters.
It's about being mindful. Where are we spending our money? How are we engaging in these conversations? Who are we voting for? Those little things add up.
Love that the little things adding up creates a ripple effect, doesn't it?
It does. We're all connected. And those ripples can turn into waves of change if we work together.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive. It's a bit overwhelming, to be honest.
It is a lot to process, these complex issues.
Hmm.
But the fact that you're engaging with them, that you're digging into the research and grappling with different viewpoints, that's what matters.
And you haven't just focused on the doom and gloom in your notes. You've highlighted those glimmers of hope, the people and organizations out there fighting for change, pushing for a better world.
They're the ones who remind us that another way is possible, that everyone deserves the chance to thrive no matter where they're starting from.
That's a world worth fighting for. So, as we wrap things up here, I'm left with one question for you, the listener. What will you do with all of this? How will you use this knowledge, this inspiration to make a difference?
What action will you take? How will you contribute to that ripple effect? Because creating a fairer world starts with each and every one of us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Keep asking those tough questions, keep learning, and keep pushing for a brighter future. That's all we've got for today's deep dive, everyone.